Java Javai, and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. I am Alexander Shin, and this is the last part of our conversation with Yedda Ljeljeng Palemek. We're living in the age of artificial intelligence, right? It's everywhere in our lives, ChatGPT, all this stuff. And of course, we live in Taiwan, an island that is key to AI development. Now, how can Taiwan's indigenous language revitalization scholars and activists use this technology to promote language revitalization and education?
Yes.
If they can, in your opinion.
Well, yes, AI is a big thing right now. But I would like to point out that AI cannot really help you learn the language. Well, if listeners are interested, there are linguists who, run a podcast talking about how AI is a con by making people think they can really learn, improve, or speak a language. Because that's not how language works, okay? But yes, we were using AI. Let me just point out give some example. This example of, when we work on indigenous languages which does not have written records, and the way we do it is we do field research, make a recording, and then we do transcriptions. When you are transcribing the recording data, it takes a lot of time, yeah? Probably 1 minute would take several hours, especially if that language is not what you're familiar with, or also because of the speaker, they speak very fast, or in a fashion that's very difficult to do. So it takes a lot of time to do the transcription, and when you transcribe, then you start to do the analysis. Then you start to build the grammar. So if at this time there is AI, let's say speech recognition software that can help you to come up with the first version of a transcription, and you just look at it and then review or re-edit. This kind of technique will really help speed up the process of building the grammar for the language and then the other things. So, of course, this kind of help is, in terms of working level, still it does not really directly contribute to the learning of the language. But it can help with researching the language and then build a grammar. So I would like to see the technology used in that way to help our research on these endangered languages faster and more efficient, so we don't have to feel sad every time we visit an informer and next time he's or she's gone. Now it happens. So we really want to speed up the research progress. And if technology can be used in that way, I think that's very good. And of course, now we're in this wireless era. People in the village sometimes do not have access to go to this school or that school because of a distance, because of a challenge on the road, or, just lack of transportation, for example. If they can have access in this wireless environment to useful data or useful films, teaching materials like on the internet, that can be used as teaching materials. That's also helping the teacher to teach the language. Technology can also help with the educational side. I can see that as a positive side, yes. But maybe it's my limited imagination, but so far I see this okay. This we expect, this we want. But there is also an important thing. Right now, the AI machine, they are building their data a lot on information which they get without the consent of the information source. And that's especially a danger for indigenous languages. So I know that for Maori language speakers, they come up with regulation and saying whatever AI data that they're training their machine with Maori language, they have to identify. It's important. We, of course, hope that the language will be used widely in a lot of domains, but the recognition of the language user, the language communities is super important, and we do not have that yet really written in law to protect this.
You mean
side.
in Taiwan? We don't.
No. I think we have a research act. When you're going to, in your research, if it's involved, it involves indigenous subject, you have to obtain their consent. But with the AI data, with this kind of big machine operation or the way they obtain their data, it's not really obvious. You don't know. For example, maybe my own recordings on my blog already been taken, and then without me being asked.
Because it's on YouTube.
Yes, that's what I meant. So this group of Maori language teachers requested in an international forum saying the AI companies should always recognize if they're using indigenous languages. And even for major languages, they do not recognize enough. So yes, I listened to this podcast, and this linguist working in the English language is still saying the same problem. That's already the major language. We are contributing without being recognized. Now, that's a huge issue. So, well, for me personally, to shortly answer that, I will welcome the technology to assist research and education, but I will not really believe AI will help a person speak the language fluently, because the language is a living organism. It lives in the interaction of people. Well, yes, you can interact with AI, but AI is actually, I cannot use the professional terms. We just listen to other podcasts, and then they will tell you they are just actually responding to what's programmed inside the data. Whatever they say, it's just, no, it's not a really meaningful interaction.
Yeah. And in relation to that, besides data sovereignty, right, and ownership, and who owns and creates the data that's being fed into this machine during the learning process, there's also this uncertainty about where the data comes from when it comes to indigenous issues or indigenous studies. And in one of your pieces, you wrote that the models trained on unknown data sometimes might contain, traces of colonialism, bias, or stereotypes about indigenous people, indigenous cultures, indigenous languages. How do we work around this problem? How do we make sure that these models, they don't perpetuate, biases and stereotypes and harmful information?
Well, be transparent in the process, consulting the communities, at least have an indigenous person on the team. Maybe that's a very quick answer to this, because your question makes me think about the book that I'm editing right now. It's about indigenous public policies and international human rights. How can we ensure that indigenous governance will not perpetrate the colonial model of suppression in their society? Because it doesn't guarantee, even if that's government created by indigenous peoples, that it will not repeat the same colonial actions. And it already happens in some cases that indigenous government does the same thing. So how do we ensure that? You just have to be very transparent and conscious of what you're doing. Constantly reminding me, as a team, as an organization, as a company, consult the community itself. But maybe consulting community is also a challenge. Which community are you going to consult? Yeah? Which body inside this community, even though you can locate the community, who are you going to consult? This happens all the way in history, like when the whites are trying to interact with the Indian, they're trying to find who is the important person. So the treaties can be signed by more than 60 people, all identified as a head, So all this is our challenges, but I think the key thing is, if you are doing this, you are trying to overcome the challenge. Whatever the result is, it already creates a positive impact, that you are doing whatever you can to be transparent and recognize the source of your information, and try not to repeat the suppression, the bad experiences from the past. I think that's the best you can do. And through doing that more and more, you will find, the way will be there. But I think the key right now is people are probably not sensitive enough, or people are not willing to be sensitive enough, knowing the tremendous task ahead and investment in time and human resources in trying to identify the just go the convenient way. A lot of things happen like that.
Right. Well, we're yet to see, right, a law in Taiwan that would make sure that the processes like training language models are transparent, in fact, when it comes to feeding indigenous data into the system.
Yeah, I think it's important to include the protection of indigenous intellectual rights. Yeah, IPR, that's very important.
And now I would like to go back to linguistics. You wrote once that Taiwan's indigenous languages, being, I quote, polysynthetic, and I would like to ask you for an explanation, may pose challenges for current automatic speech recognition and transcription systems. Could you please tell us more, and how is it different from Indo-European languages where most models are trained? How does a language like Paiwan, which can be polysynthetic, pose a challenge for a machine learning process?
Okay, from now I have to be very careful with what I write.
It was an extremely interesting article, and I immediately had a lot of follow-up questions. I'm glad you're sitting right in front of me.
Thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. It makes me think a lot as well, and it helps me value what I do. What I mean by that is the grammar of this language. Although we try to understand the grammar using our understanding of, let's say, the major language grammar, which is basically English, our language is quite different. For example, we have case markers, which indicates the function of the word, let's say the noun inside, whether the noun is the doer, the actor, or the affected participant of this sentence. And it's polysynthetic. It mainly refers to the verb. We have a lot of a verb that has a root, and then when you add something a little before, a little behind, a little in the middle, it changes the thing. It changes the meaning of this.
Looks very
word.
Different from the original.
Yes. I'm not sure right now. The AI, which is mostly trained with a language not like this, will be able to help, decipher this language. So there must be a different way of working with this kind of language with a lot of different system, different features, let's say. It has a lot of affixation, it has a case marking system, it has a different word order, and it also has a feature where it's a single word, but when you put it different places, it has different meanings. It gives nuances to the entire context. We cannot really just conveniently use AI machine trained by language A to directly use in Paiwan, for example, because Paiwan is just not the same as language A.
Very different structure.
Yes, but whether or how we develop the structure for a language like Paiwan, where a verb can change its meaning depending on what it's added onto, or even the noun, then that's a question I cannot answer because I'm not engineering. It's basically the grammar of Paiwan language is just different. And I don't think we have enough grammar information for the engineering to build up this kind of machine model like that.
Well, that's a very interesting conversation, Yedda. Thank you so much for your time and for being with us throughout these 3 episodes.
Thank you very much for having me. I also learned a lot.
And dear listeners, thank you for being with us. Of course, do come back next week for another one of Taiwan's fascinating languages.